Okay, so I've seen a lot of videos out there about how to throw a knuckleball. None of them really encompass what it really takes to throw one consistently. I mean, they're not, I don't want to say bad descriptions, but they're very general. They don't give a good idea of how hard it really is to throw one. So, first off, I don't recommend this pitch for anybody who doesn't already have solid fastball mechanics or can't throw strikes with their fastball to begin with. Basically because this is even harder to control and you have to have some sort of velocity before it's going to get a consistent dance on it. You can't just lob it out there and expect for it to move like you want it to. And here's the basic idea of the knuckleball. It's sort of a random pitch, I guess you could say. When the air catches the seams, when it's going through the air without any spin, air pockets form behind the ball and they're never the same, so it's always going to give you something different. Sometimes you'll get sort of a shaking, dancing movement. Sometimes you may just get, two little curves. Sometimes, something I've noticed, when the winds change towards fall, the ball will even surge or even almost stop on its way there. And that's just about where the air pockets are at and what the wake is doing behind the ball. Sometimes it'll just drop or dive off to one side at the very end. It's not going to be consistent, and that's the whole point of the pitch, to be consistently inconsistent. If it's doing the same thing every time, it's not really that great a knuckleball because it's easier to catch on to. It's going to be doing the same thing, and then people can start to track the pitch. That's the exact opposite of what you want to do with a knuckleball. But there's so many different ways to throw it. That's kind of why I don't like the other tutorials. They sort of imply that there's one good grip. A lot of them will tell you 4 fingers on the seam. Some will tell you 3 fingers on the seam. Some will tell you to actually use your knuckles, which if it works for you, fine, but you've got to be able to actually experiment and find what works for you. What works for me is I take a bald spot behind the horseshoe seam right here, and I use 2 fingers. If that's because I've got somewhat bigger hands. If you have smaller hands, I would usually recommend trying to use more fingers, just because that seems to be the general way it works. Again, just if you want to really learn how to throw it, you've got to experiment and find what works for you. The way I throw it, personally, is I just stiffen my wrist and sort of flick my fingers out with Dave Clark's fire and follow method. It works pretty well for me, but it may not for some of you. I would try that, and if it doesn't work, try other things, like maybe loosen your wrist up and just flick really hard when you throw it. Or one thing you don't want to do though is push it. If you push it, that's the biggest misconception about a knuckleball. If you push it, you're not going to get enough velocity. It's not going to be able to move. It's just going to sort of float towards the plate. That's batting practice, essentially. It'll look like an ephus or something similar to that. You can't be throwing that all the time. I would definitely recommend, before learning a knuckleball, at least knowing how to throw a fastball or a curve or a changeup. Because if you can pitch with conventional pitches, you may not want to try a knuckleball at all. Just stick with your normal pitches. A knuckleball, I really don't recommend for most people. Just if you try it and you've got a real knack for it, go ahead. But that's how I started pitching, was I found out how to throw a knuckleball, and it was pretty good, and that's basically all I can throw now because I never worked on any other pitches when I was younger. And it's just like any other pitch. You can grip it so many different ways. Just like a curveball, you can go with your normal curve, your beginner curve, or a sort of knuckle curve, and they're all basically the same pitch. A knuckleball is no different. You can go two finger on the seam, two finger off the seam, three finger, whatever. Try not to generalize your grip. It's something difficult for a lot of people to understand. You can't just toss it up there and use one specific grip. I mean, I even know Johnny Nagelling used to throw it like that. He was a pitcher for the Washington Senators. Eddie Sacote, he was with the Black Sox scandal. He sort of invented the grip, even threw it something like that. I've even seen people use their ring and middle finger. So again, just try to find what works for you. It's not something that's going to be a real general thing. You can't just take one person's word for what you should do. I mean, the other thing is, make sure your mechanics are working right before you start throwing it. That's another misconception, that you can just pick it up and start throwing it without good mechanics, because it's not true. You've got to at least be throwing it somewhere in the 50s for it to start moving, and it's usually not going to get that real big dancing movement unless you're throwing it, 60, anywhere from 60 to 70 miles an hour. It's difficult to throw. I would show you what it sort of looks like, but there's 2 feet of snow outside. It's kind of difficult to do in 2 feet of snow, but that's how I throw. So how I throw it again is just stiffen the wrist and just follow it out with my fingertips. That's what I find to be the best way to do it. If you want to try something else, go ahead. It's an experiment and feel pitch. Most people don't learn how to throw it, but if you really want to learn how to do it, you've got to find out how to fire and follow. You got to find out how you're going to kill the spin and how you're going to get it to move. And one other thing, don't get discouraged if you don't see any movement, because it's hardest to see the movement from where you throw it. Phil Necro oftentimes said he couldn't see his own movement, and the best person to ask is a batter or a catcher, or even the people behind you when you're warming up. That's the best way to tell if it's moving. And if you get a real reaction out of a batter or a catcher, that's when you know it's working. That's my tutorial on the knuckleball. Again, learn conventional pitches before you start throwing this. That's how you're most likely to be a better pitcher with conventional pitches than trying to throw a knuckleball, especially if you think you can throw one but you can't, because I know a lot of people that are like that. So good luck to you in your attempts at the knuckleball, and goodbye.